right, Joe Bob Briggs still here. The sudden giant crab attack followed by the sudden tidal wave, followed by Imogen Hassall drowning in quicksand, followed by the great scene of Patrick Allen as the tribal chieftain trying to yell at the tidal wave so it will go in the opposite direction, followed by True Love Triumphant. How can you not love that movie? When dinosaurs ruled the earth. Kind of makes you want to go to the Canary Islands and buy a loincloth at the airport gift shop, doesn't it? Okay, next week at this time, we won't be here. For the first time in the history of this show, at least since I've been doing this show, we are actually taking a week off due to the big Elvis Death Day special, where all we do is show Elvis movies for 90 hours or some incredible number like that. Did Elvis make a monster movie? I guess he didn't, or else we would be on, wouldn't we? But 2 weeks from tonight, on the 23rd, we'll have Zombie Night, Return of the Living Dead 2, followed by Night of the Living Dead. The dead must rise, and they must be gross. Kind of an end-of-the-summer zombie special, so be watching for that in 2 weeks. Time for Joe Bob's last call, and I can already hear what you're going to say to me Monday morning. You're going to say, Joe Bob, why in the heck did you show Howard the Duck? And the reason is I'm one of the few people on the planet who actually likes Howard the Duck. I don't know if you remember, but when George Lucas made this, it was supposed to be the next super mega big deal monster hit movie, and they wouldn't tell anybody what the duck looked like. It was a big secret, and it was also a secret who was inside the duck suit and how the duck worked, and then the movie came out, and what happens? Quack, quack. You know, made about 20 cents, and everybody jumped all over it like sleaze on a congressman, and I don't think it's that bad. It was supposed to be the comic book version of E.T., where the duck is from a duck planet, and he gets sucked down to Earth, and he doesn't have any way to get home, and so he becomes the manager for a punk rock band, and he hangs around the employment agency and complains about the food. But the big difference between E.T. and Howard the Duck is that they made E.T. like real alien, and they made Howard like real human. And actually, I think they did darn near everything right except one thing, and I'll tell you what that one thing is later, but you'll probably figure it out yourself. But I think you might like this movie if you just kind of go with it and you say, hey, the character's a midget duck. I can accept that. This movie is about a midget duck walking around Cleveland in a duck suit. And don't sit there like a big shot movie critic saying, I can't believe how stupid this is. Well, of course it's stupid. It's the movies, okay? Roll it. We'll discuss this in greater detail later. See, if you go to the movie thinking, I'm going to hate this, then guess what? You're going to hate it. I think that's what people did in this case. You know, I ain't going to watch a midget duck. Okay, your loss.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
Okay, here's what I think doesn't work. The voice of the duck. The duck sounds like a whining wimp chemistry student telling you about his erector set or something. The duck voice is really lame. The duck voice ought to be funny, right? Like George Burns or something. But we get this duck waddling around sounding like such a weenie that finally we say, hey, we just can't get behind this duck. I think a new duck voice and George Lucas could have had a mega hit. I understand why they did what they did. They were going for Woody Allen. They wanted a neurotic Jewish duck from outer space, you know, a duck who'd had too much therapy. It's a funny idea, but it's just not good for a special effects movie. Think Walter Matthau. Think Jack Warden. Think how much funnier the duck would have been. Okay, that's my 2 cents worth. George Lucas shouldn't have gotten beat up for this the way he was attacked. It was a good try, and George, if you're watching, that'll be $500 for the consulting. Thank you. Roll the film. See, I specialize in fixing films 11 years after they come out. I'm not fast, but I'm expensive.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
Okay, see what I mean about the voice? Howard is smoking a cigar, right? Woody Allen doesn't smoke a cigar. Walter Matthau smokes a cigar, okay? I'm not going to dwell on it, but it's the voice that they screwed up. Anyway, I love Tim Robbins in this movie. Now, when you think back on Tim Robbins' roles, nobody says, I loved you in Howard the Duck, man. You were awesome. But he was awesome. He's the funniest thing in the movie. Me, Phil, you, Howard, we be friends. You know, if everything in the movie was as funny as Tim Robbins, it'd be a great movie. Tim is an interesting guy, son of a Greenwich Village folk singer, grew up doing experimental theater, founded one of those theaters in L.A. that does acclaimed plays that nobody ever goes to see, but everybody talks about how acclaimed they are. And, of course, he achieved immortality on screen when he made Fraternity Vacation, 1985. His life has never been the same since. I don't think he would have gotten the big Howard the Duck part if it hadn't been for Fraternity Vacation. Study the subtle contours of his performance as Phil, the goofball lab assistant in Howard the Duck. We now have the depressed duck montage sequence. Howard is at the end of his tether, so pay attention. This'll make you tear up like a little girl watching a baby kitten getting clubbed to death.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
Lea Thompson, she can really sing, can't she? She's such a sweetie in this movie. Of course, she's a sweetie in every movie. That was kind of her job, professional sweetie in all these movies she made in the early 80s. She was a ballet dancer. Then she was discovered in Burger King commercials. She had that perfect girl next door face, and that got her cast in all the right moves in Jaws 3D and Red Dawn and Back to the Future. And then there was that year where she made both Space Camp and Howard the Duck. So, whoa, instant therapy. Yeah. Anyhow, she does that Caroline in the City show now, so she's fine, I would imagine. But let's watch her now as she does her big love scene with the duck. A scene that goes right up to that gross out line and then pulls back just in time. So roll it. See, right here is where they started to lose the audience. This is where it started getting murky and episodic, and they never quite got us back because Howard futzing around the apartment in his bathrobe, character development scene, too late, you know, exposition scene, too late. I hate exposition scenes. So here you go. 8 minutes and 32 seconds of exposition calling up. I call this a bathroom segment. In case you're thinking about it, go ahead.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
You know how Tim Robbins tries to talk Howard into staying on Earth so he can be on AM Cleveland? That's really funny the way Tim Robbins does it. But AM Cleveland is actually a very famous and respected morning talk show in Cleveland. And they had the good sense to have me as a guest on AM Cleveland once. Cleveland is this great media city. Got talk shows out the wazoo. So since I'm bored with Howard the Duck right now, I'm just going to talk about Cleveland. I made my stand-up comedy debut in Cleveland. Actually in Berea, Ohio, at the Berea Civic Center, also known as the High School Auditorium, right directly in the flight path of the Cleveland Airport. And I'd never been on stage before, and about 600 of the nicest people in the history of the world watched a pretty unbearable act and actually stayed afterward to talk to me in the lobby and encourage me. You know all those guys who do stand-up and they talk about the years when everybody heckled them and booed them off the stage? See, I didn't have to do that because I went to Cleveland. I love Cleveland. They watched a really bad act in Cleveland, and they said, "That's okay, Joe Bob. We know you'll make it better." And I worked my hiney off, and I finally whipped that act into shape because I had to do it in San Francisco where they're not as tolerant if you screw up. But anyway, I go back there occasionally and do some of the radio talk shows, my second home. Now, wasn't that a heartwarming story? You guys are just puking all over your cameras, aren't you? Okay, back to the movie. It's not easy to get booked on AM Cleveland. Normally, you got to be an incest victim or something to be on that show.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
See, now it's getting really unfunny. I told you, bird brain, I am not Jenning anymore. Try telling that to your insurance company. Not funny. How does a line like that stay in the script? This script, by the way, is by Willard Hike and Gloria Katz, who wrote one of my favorite movies, American Graffiti. And they also wrote Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But they just went south on this one. I don't know what happened. Willard directed this one, too, so you'd think he'd be polishing that thing like crazy. It was based on a cult comic book by Steve Gerber that was published from 1976 to 1979, and people just loved that comic book. In fact, people who love the comic book hate the movie more than anybody else because they say they spoiled the spirit of the comic book. The first part of the comic story spends a lot of time on the duck planet, the planet Howard comes from, and that's all done in about 2 minutes during the opening titles of this movie. So anyway, time for the best special effects sequence in the whole movie. If you're thinking of going to bed, stay up for just this one more segment, the brawl scene at Joe Roma's Cajun Sushi Diner. Doesn't really help the movie, but it's fun to watch. Okay, roll it. See, they lost us here when they started talking about the laser spectroscope and how Howard got to Earth and how they're going to get him back and energy inversions and all that. Because I know that's where we're supposed to be headed, but we don't care about any of that stuff by this point. You know, we're looking at Howard and we're thinking, wonder what the midget in the suit looks like. You know, wonder if he can breathe in there. Wonder if it's that same little guy that did E.T. Wonder if he's ever done that dwarf bowling stuff. You know, because we're just zoning out at this point. We're thinking about everything. I love dwarf bowling, by the way. Only when it's done with dignity, though.
Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
Well, when they strap Howard to the carving table and put seasoning on him and sharpen that cleaver, that's just totally unbelievable. I'm sorry. I know everything in a movie like this is totally unbelievable, but it still has to be believable within the context of being unbelievable, if you catch my drift. So from here on out, it's just one big chase scene, and in fact, this might be the longest chase scene put on film since the one in Bullet. This chase scene probably cost, I don't know, $10 million to shoot. I don't know how much it costs. A lot of bucks for the duck. Roll it so we can eventually go home here, you know? They also hired John Barry to do the music for this movie. You know, the guy who did all the James Bond films and Born Free and The Lion in Winter and Out of Africa. He also did Howard the Duck. So if you went to one of those concerts, you know, where he conducts the Boston Pops or something, you think he would say, at this time I will conduct the operatic version of Born Free, followed by the gyrocopter chase scene theme from Howard the Duck. Probably not.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
All right, while we're waiting for the big neutron disintegrator action sequence conclusion to Howard the Duck, this might be a time to take a moment for Joe Bob's Advice to the Hopeless, our weekly mailbag in which we answer a question from one of our devoted Monstervision viewers. And tonight's letter poured in from Dr. Gonzo of the Internet. And Dr. Gonzo writes, Joe Bob, do you film your show at the Techwood facility in Atlanta or somewhere else? Dr. Gonzo. You know, a lot of people ask me this for some reason. They want to know, you know, just where are you, Joe Bob, when you do that show? All right, so we film Monstervision at the beautiful and lavish studios of Channel 33 in Dallas, Texas. They're all here now, local affiliate of the acclaimed WB network. And they let us stay here all night long and do this stuff as long as we don't interrupt the schedule of the after-school puppet show or the 5:30 a.m. farm report. And in fact, Jack Stram should be arriving any moment now to start preparing those soybean dispatches. Is Jack here yet? Because, you know, this movie is running long. This is a long movie. Okay, we better get back to the flick. That's it. I got the plug-in, Channel 33, Dallas. You know, I'm the kind of person who will actually sit there and watch the latest reports on hog production in Arkansas. You know, I'm watching those shows and I'm thinking, oh, production is down in the Delta, but it's up in the mountain regions. And then I go, why do I want this in my brain? And then I think, well, it's better than just watching cartoons on Nickelodeon, because at least you're gathering information into yourself that you can never use.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
What? More commercials? What was that segment, 3 minutes? Just roll on through this part of the movie. He's fighting the Dark Overlords with his cannon on wheels thingy. See, the crack TNT sales department, they're thinking, hey, we can slip in one more commercial break. Nobody's watching this stuff at the end. Well, somebody is. Somebody who's really bored, you know, in western Kentucky, who lives with his mother. He's still watching this, so go ahead. The thrilling conclusion to Howard the Duck. Go. I'm going to have to fly to Atlanta and kick some butt. You know, these people make a few movies about Indians and they think they're a real network. Ted wouldn't be up late watching this, would he? Because I didn't mean that about the Indians.
Back to Joe Bob's Last Call and Howard the Duck on TNT.
Yes, that was the Howard the Duck guitar solo as Howard performs the song Howard the Duck, which was, of course, available on the Howard the Duck original soundtrack album, which is still selling, I'm sure, in many of the finer discount record shops in Greenwich Village basements. I think that's about it for Howard the Duck. We've beat this bird about as much as we can. So, all right, next week, we won't be here because they're doing some kind of all-day tribute to Elvis. They're showing nothing but Elvis movies, so we're not invited. Monstervision is excluded. My feelings are not hurt by that, but 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have a whole bunch of zombies. Zombies all night long with Return of the Living Dead 2, followed by Night of the Living Dead, the remake from the 80s. And you can stick a fork in me, I'm done. Did you guys hear the one about this guy who goes to a bar that's on the 10th floor of a hotel? And the guy sits down, he has a couple of drinks, and then he stands up and he announces loudly that he's had enough. And he walks over and he jumps out the window. And everybody's amazed. But there are two men sitting at a window table, and they're curious to see what happens to the guy, so they watch as the man plummets towards his certain death. But just as he's about to hit the ground, he rights himself, pulls his legs into an upright position, and just kind of lands gracefully on the sidewalk like he had an invisible parachute or something. He turns, walks right back into the building. Well, the two guys that saw it are totally amazed. So the guy comes back into the bar, he orders a few more drinks, and then he announces again that he's going to jump out the window. And he does it. And the same thing happens. And the two men at the window seat, they're astounded. So the guy returns again, he repeats the procedure again, and the two men stop him right before he jumps, and they ask him, how on earth does he do that? And he says, well, it's simple, really. There's an air vent down by the ground, and if you catch the updraft, you can right yourself and land on the ground with no problems. So then he proceeds to jump out the window again. Well, these two guys, they decide that they just have to try this for themselves. So they jump out the window. Splat! Huge mess all over the ground. Meanwhile, the first guy's made it back up to the bar. He sits down to order his drinks. The bartender walks over to him and says, Superman, you can be a real jerk when you're drunk. Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that the drive-in will never die. When you tell the joke on TV, you have to say jerk. There's actually a better punchline, but we'll leave it at that.